Welcome to Family Drama Stories from Reddit. Real family drama, told from the heart. Let's begin. I never imagined that buying my first home at 45, after years of scraping by, would spark a family war. But when my brother showed up with a moving truck, uninvited, claiming our parents said it was his now, everything changed. They expected me to pack up and live in the shed out back. I stayed calm until they tried to take the deed. That's when I hit record and everything unravelled. I spent over 20 years working double shifts at the diner and saving every penny. No vacations, no fancy handbags, not even cable TV. Just work, save, and keep my head down. When I finally landed a promotion at the community centre managing events, I cried right there in the break room. That job gave me the stability I needed to start hunting for a small home of my own. At 45, I finally closed on a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet town just outside Lexington. It wasn't much by anyone's standards, but to me, it was everything. A fenced yard, a tiny porch swing, and a kitchen where I could finally learn to bake without bumping elbows with anyone. It wasn't just a house. It was peace, safety, my own corner of the world, away from all the family noise that had followed me most of my life. For years, I played the role of the dependable older sister, the one who'd babysit last minute, send grocery money, help with car repairs. My younger brother, Chris, was always the golden child. He dropped out of 2 colleges, bounced between jobs, and married a woman named Tiffany who could charm a snake. She had this way of calling me Big Sis, with a sugary smile that always made me check my wallet afterward. After I bought the house, I didn't make a big announcement. Just a quiet post on Facebook with a picture of my keys and a thank you to the loan officer. The caption said, "Finally home." It got the usual likes and hearts and a few comments from old co-workers. I thought nothing of it until my mother called the next day, sounding unusually cheerful. "I saw the post," she said. "That house looks big. 2 bedrooms, right?" I knew where this was going. "Yep, just right for me and maybe a guest." She laughed softly. "Well, it's good to know you've got extra room. Chris has been looking at places too, but the market's just impossible these days." I kept my tone polite. "Yeah, I know. It's tough out there." That was the end of it. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I was out back pulling weeds from the garden bed when I heard the crunch of gravel. I looked up to see a U-Haul pulling into the driveway. I froze. Out stepped Chris, Tiffany, their 3 kids, and, God help me, their dog. Tiffany was wearing wedge heels and designer sunglasses, like she was about to host a barbecue, not barge in uninvited. "Surprise," she said, waving. "We figured we'd get ahead of the move-in rush." Chris walked up with a clipboard and said, "Where should we start unloading?" I stood there in my gardening gloves, stunned. "What are you talking about?" He looked confused. "Didn't Mom tell you? She said you'd be letting us move in while we get back on our feet, just until we can save up for a down payment." "You never asked me," I said. Chris rolled his eyes. "Come on, you've got more space than you need. It's just temporary," Tiffany chimed in. "We even brought our own dishes. You won't have to do a thing. You can just chill in the guest room or the shed out back." I don't know what made me angrier. The entitlement, the smugness, or the way they assumed I had no say in my own home. I held up my hand. "No, absolutely not. This isn't happening." Chris's smile dropped. "You're really going to turn away your own family?" Tiffany whispered something to him and he stepped closer. "Look, just think about it. You've always been the responsible one. You can help us out for a few months. You owe it to us." That was when I realised something cold and hard. They didn't think I owned this house. They thought I owed them this house. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I worked for this. I earned every brick, and I'm not handing it over. That's when Tiffany's expression twisted. "You think you're better than us now, just because you've got a little porch and a mortgage?" Chris said. "You're being selfish. It's just space." I walked toward the front door. "You have 5 minutes to leave, or I'm calling the police." Tiffany scoffed. You wouldn't dare. I opened the door, pulled out my phone and said, "Watch me." And just like that, their little fantasies started to crack. But the worst was still to come. Chris didn't move. He stood in the middle of my front yard, one hand on his hip and the other holding his phone like he was waiting for someone to tell him this was all just a joke. Tiffany wasn't as patient. She let out an exaggerated sigh and waved her perfectly manicured fingers toward the kids, who had already started pulling out plastic tubs from the U-Haul. "Grab the toys and the dog crate," she snapped. "We're not staying out here in the heat." I stepped off the porch and planted myself between the truck and the front door. "I'm not kidding," I said. "Turn around. This is my house. You don't live here. You were never invited here." Chris looked like he wanted to argue, but Tiffany was already dialing her phone. I could hear her voice pitch up a few notches, what I call her performance mode. "Yes, hello, Mom. Yeah, it's me. Can you believe your daughter is kicking us out? She's making your grandkids stand in the sun and refuse to let us in." "Yes, I know," you said she agreed. Well, apparently she lied. "Yeah, I know. I'm shocked too." She made a show of glancing at me while dramatically wiping an imaginary tear from her cheek. Chris chimed in. "Mom said you were on board. She said you offered. You even said you'd fix up the guest room for us." I narrowed my eyes. "No, I didn't. That never happened. And if she told you that, then she lied." Tiffany moved the phone away from her ear and said sweetly, "Well, then you better tell her yourself." "Because she's on her way over," I groaned. "Of course she is." Within 15 minutes, my mother pulled up in her battered sedan, already shaking her head before she even stepped out. She didn't greet me, just went straight to Tiffany, giving her a dramatic hug as if she'd just survived some trauma. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I thought everything was arranged," my mum said loud enough for the entire street to hear. I told her it was the right thing to do. I crossed my arms. "No, you decided it was the right thing to do. You told them without telling me. That's not the same." She turned to me with that stern, disappointed look I hadn't missed at all. "You have a whole house and no one to share it with. You don't even like hosting anyone. What do you need all this space for?" I tried to stay calm. "I need it because it's mine. I worked for this. I saved every dime and bought this house on my own. I am not a backup plan." Chris started again. "But think about it. The kids would have their own room. We'd finally have some peace and quiet. It's not fair that you get to live like this while we're still packed in like sardines." "Not fair?" I repeated. "Chris, I've been homeless. I lived out of a camper for months while you and Tiffany were cozy under Mum and Dad's roof. You laughed at me. Remember?" That shut him up. For a second. But my mother stepped in again. "Let's not dredge up the past. You're his sister. You owe him help." "No," I said, quieter now. "I don't owe him anything." Silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Tiffany broke it. "Well, if you won't let us stay in the house, at least let us use the camper. The kids think it's fun." "No," I snapped. "It's not a guest house, it's mine, and it's staying locked." My mother's face tightened. "You're making a mistake, Julia." I smiled thinly. "No, Mum, you made the mistake when you assumed I'd let you walk all over me again." She looked like she wanted to argue, but Tiffany had already grabbed the kids and started her dramatic retreat to the car, muttering about how I'd turned into a bitter old maid. Chris hesitated a second longer, then followed them. My mother was the last to leave. She stood by her car and said, "You'll regret this when you're old and alone." I stared at her for a moment, then said, "Maybe, but at least I'll be alone in my own home." She didn't say another word. When they finally drove off, I stood on the porch for a long while, just breathing. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, but it was mine, and I wasn't done yet. The following day, I expected a few texts, maybe even a voicemail filled with guilt-tripping or dramatic sighs. What I didn't expect was for my phone to explode with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Cousins, aunts, even a few of my dad's old friends. Every one of them had something to say about how family comes first and how I was too proud to help. Someone, likely Tiffany or my mother, had gone on a social media rampage. They didn't tell the truth, of course. According to their posts, I had invited them to move in and then changed my mind at the last second. They painted a picture of 4 little children left crying in a driveway while their cold, bitter aunt slammed the door in their faces. I was livid. Not because they twisted the facts, I expected that, but because they dared to use the kids as props for their sympathy parade. I'd always tried to stay out of their parenting mess, but I loved those children. I sent them birthday cards, picked out thoughtful gifts, even once babysat overnight when Tiffany had a migraine, code for girls' night. To now be portrayed as a heartless villain? That stung. I tried to ignore the noise, but it followed me to work. One of the receptionists gently pulled me aside after lunch and whispered, "Hey, is everything okay at home? I saw some posts. Just wanted to make sure you're all right." So they were spreading lies beyond family. I could only imagine what my co-workers thought. Instead of lashing out, I stayed quiet, at least publicly. Privately, I began documenting everything. Screenshots, voicemail transcriptions, even the call log showing how many times they'd contacted me in just 24 hours. A friend who works in HR advised me to keep a clear record, just in case things get worse. I didn't have to wait long. That weekend, while I was out running errands, I got a motion alert from the camera over my driveway. I opened the app to see Chris and Tiffany standing by the camper. She was rattling the door handle while Chris stood back with his arms crossed like this was completely normal. I drove home faster than I should have. When I pulled into the driveway, they acted like they were the ones being inconvenienced. "You said no to the house," Tiffany said with a shrug. "Not the camper." I didn't even get out of the car. I cracked the window and said, "Yep, leave. Now." Chris walked up to the car and leaned in like he had some big revelation to share. "You're being ridiculous. This is family. We just need a place for a few months." "You've already lied to everyone about what happened," I said calmly. "You really think I'm going to trust you, living 10 feet from my bedroom?" Tiffany scoffed. "We wouldn't even talk to you. Think of it like renting a guest house." "Oh, you'll pay rent now?" I asked. Silence. Then she snapped. "We deserve this. You don't even need this much space. You don't even have a family." That last line cut deeper than I wanted it to. I had once imagined a house filled with laughter, music, little feet running down hallways. But life had other plans, and I'd made peace with that, until Tiffany used it like a weapon. I took a breath. "You're right," I said. "I don't have a family. Not the kind that breaks in, lies, and manipulates people for pity." Chris's face hardened. "This isn't over." I gave him a cold smile. "It is for you." I raised my phone and showed them I was already on a live call with the non-emergency police line. They left. But that night I didn't sleep. I kept the lights on, just in case. I double-checked all the doors. For the first time since I'd bought the house, I didn't feel safe in it. By Monday, I'd called a locksmith to change every lock and a local contractor to install a proper fence and gate. I even invested in better security cameras. I hated feeling paranoid in my own space, but I wasn't about to let them scare me out of it. This home was mine. I'd earned every square foot of it, and I was finally ready to defend it, not just from strangers, but from the people who claimed to love me while treating me like a backup plan. A few quiet days passed after I changed the locks and upgraded the security system. I didn't hear a peep from Chris or Tiffany, and for a moment I started to believe maybe, just maybe, they had accepted defeat. I went back to cooking real meals, watering my small garden, and even started painting again. It felt like I was finally getting back to the life I'd fought so hard to build. But peace never lasts long when you're dealing with people who think no is just a starting point for negotiation. The following Sunday, I returned from the grocery store to find a flyer taped to my door. It was a family reunion invitation. Not unusual, except it was hosted at my house. The address, the date, everything was printed in bold black ink. Right beneath that, a list of activities, potluck, kids' games, even a note that the backyard is spacious, bring lawn chairs. I stood frozen on my front porch for a full minute. Chris and Tiffany had planned a family reunion at my home, without telling me, without asking, without my permission. I called the number listed on the bottom of the flyer, my mother's. She picked up on the second ring, chirping a cheerful, "Hi, honey." I didn't waste time. "Why is my house listed on this flyer?" There was a pause. Then, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, she said, "Oh, we figured it would be a nice surprise. You've got the space, and everyone's so excited to see your new home." I let the silence stretch. "You never asked me," she sighed. "You would have said no. You always do when it comes to helping out your brother." I could feel the pressure building behind my eyes. "So you thought trespassing and putting my address on a public flyer was the better option?" "Stop being dramatic," she snapped. "It's one afternoon." I hung up without another word. The anger that had simmered under my skin now boiled over. It wasn't just about a flyer. It was the years of dismissal, of being told to get over it, of watching my brother be given everything while I was treated like an afterthought. I'd spent years trying to keep the peace, trying not to rock the boat, but I wasn't a child anymore. And this was my life, my home, my rules. I called my lawyer first thing Monday morning. Within 48 hours, I had a formal cease and desist letter drafted and sent to my parents, Chris and Tiffany. It spelled out, in crystal clear legal terms, that they were not welcome on my property. They had no permission to plan or host any events there. And if they showed up uninvited, I would call the police without hesitation. I also posted a short, polite message on social media, just enough to correct the narrative. I didn't name names, I didn't rant. I simply stated that no reunion would be taking place at my home and that any flyers claiming otherwise were unauthorized. The support I received in the comments was overwhelming. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years chimed in, expressing their disbelief. A few even admitted they'd been misled by my brother and were glad to know the truth. That evening, Tiffany messaged me. It was a long, venomous paragraph about how ungrateful I was and how I had shamed the family. I didn't respond. I blocked her. A few days later, I received a handwritten letter from my mother. It wasn't an apology. It was a guilt trip disguised as concern. She wrote about how lonely she felt, how she missed the close-knit family we used to be, and how she hoped I'd come to my senses and stop letting bitterness guide my decisions. I read it twice. Then I placed it in a folder labelled Documentation, slid it into my filing cabinet, and poured myself a glass of wine. That weekend, I bought a wooden sign and nailed it into the front lawn. It read, "Private property, no trespassing." Subtle, but clear. I wasn't afraid anymore. They could talk, they could whine, they could throw tantrums from afar. But the locks were changed, the cameras were rolling, and the door was staying shut. This was my home, and for the first time, I was living in it, on my terms. Summer slipped into fall, and with it came a peaceful stillness I hadn't known in years. I filled the rooms of my home with things I loved. Quiet mornings with coffee and a book by the window, weekend painting sessions in the spare room, warm dinners with close friends who respected boundaries. For the first time since buying the house, I felt like I was breathing in a space that truly belonged to me. Then came the knock. It was a chilly Saturday morning. I had just come back from the farmer's market, arms full of sunflowers and fresh produce, when I heard it, a sharp, deliberate knock on the front door. I knew that knock. I'd heard it all my life. Through the peephole, I saw my father. Not Chris, not Tiffany, not my mother. Just him, standing there, hat in hand, looking older than I remembered. I opened the door halfway, cautious. "Can I help you?" He looked me in the eyes, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "I came to apologize," he said. The words didn't land right away. It was like they floated in the air between us, waiting to see if I'd catch them or swat them away. "I didn't know everything," he continued. "Your mother, she didn't tell me the full story. About the house, about the flyer. I thought you were being difficult again." He paused, swallowing his pride like it tasted bitter. "But I saw the footage," he added, "from your phone. Your cousin sent it to me." That explained a lot. I hadn't shared the video of the confrontation with many people, but apparently one of the cousins who had seen it felt he needed to. My father shook his head slowly. "I didn't raise you to be treated that way, and I'm sorry I let it happen." I didn't say anything, not because I didn't believe him, but because I didn't know what to do with the part of me that still wanted his approval. That small, healing part that remembered how many times he'd looked the other way, how many holidays he'd let Chris steal the spotlight while I sat in the corner pretending it didn't hurt. "I'm not here to fix everything," he said. "I just thought you deserved to hear it from me." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for 1,000. "Use it for your garden, or don't. I just thought maybe this could be a gesture, not payment, just something." I stared at the check, not because of the amount, but because this was the first time he'd ever offered me anything without expecting something in return. After a long pause, I said, "Thank you." He nodded, turned, and walked back to his truck. I never cashed the check. I framed it, actually, put it in my office as a reminder, not of the money, but of the moment someone who never saw me finally did. As the weeks went on, things with my family quieted down. Chris and Tiffany never showed up again. Word must have spread because no one else tried to cross that line either. Occasionally, I'd get a birthday card from my mum with nothing inside but her handwriting. "Still waiting for you to come around." I never replied. Instead, I kept building a life I was proud of. I planted a small garden bed in the backyard where my camper once sat. Tomatoes, herbs, sunflowers. It became a small ritual. Hands in the dirt, face in the sun, heart finally steady. I adopted a rescue dog, named him Jasper. He liked to follow me around while I worked outside, his tail wagging like he knew he was part of something good now. On Thanksgiving, I invited the security guard who once watched over my camper, a couple of friends from work, and even that cousin who leaked the video. We cooked, we laughed, we told stories until the sun went down and the porch lights blinked on. It wasn't a big family gathering, but it was full of people who cared. And that, I realised, was enough. Family doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it's found in the places where you're finally seen, where you're heard without having to shout, where you're allowed to be exactly who you are. No compromise, no begging for space. This was my home, my peace, my ending, and best of all, my beginning. There's something powerful about reclaiming your voice after a lifetime of being silenced. This story reminds us that sometimes the hardest thing to do is stand up to the people who raised you, especially when they expect your silence to be permanent. But peace doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from drawing the line and saying no more. This isn't just a story about a house. It's about boundaries, resilience, and the painful but necessary journey of choosing yourself. Whether you're the black sheep, the quiet sibling, or the one who's always been overlooked, remember, you're allowed to protect your space, your joy, and your future. And when you finally step into your own, don't let guilt pull you back. To everyone watching, have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family dynamic to protect your peace? If so, how did you do it? Share your story in the comments. We read every one. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new post. This is family drama stories from Reddit, real stories, raw emotions, and the strength it takes to say enough.